From WBFO and Buffalo Toronto Public Media, this is Buffalo What's Next, Producer Picks, highlights of important interviews from our weekday discussion on race, education, and segregation. On today's program, Melodie Baker from Just Equations on communication.
You know, children at a very young age, they end up having to learn how to code switch. There's nothing more comfortable to me than being in my own environment and using double negatives. I love that.
Antoine Johnson is here from the Buffalo Prenatal Perinatal Network Fatherhood program. Author Desiree Williams wrote Beautiful Brown Babies for her son Cortland. He will be here too. And Buffalo Schools Associate Superintendent Fatima Morell on the Emancipation Curriculum. I'm Brigid Jaipaul-Valenza. Thank you for being with us. Up first, Thomas O'Neill White with Melodie Baker. She's from Just Equations and talks about unequal education.
There are specific areas of education that has been inaccessible, in particularly mathematics. People have no idea how math, in and of itself, from pre-K all the way to college, has been stereotypically geared toward a specific group, white males, traditionally, and of course, we look stereotypically at Asians as being, really good in math. And just the idea and how we stereotype people, it makes young black girls think that, oh, I'm not that good in math, and it's just something that is inherent. It's a biological thing that we just don't, think in terms of numbers. We're more creative, and we're more into language and not necessarily into math. But that one ideology is why we have an overwhelming number of black women not pursuing STEM fields, because we know that math in particular is the pipeline into STEM, and STEM fields on average are going to offer 10 to 17% higher income than any other population. As a matter of fact, about a few years ago, in 2018, the U.S. Department of Labor, they came out with a statistic about STEM degrees, STEM jobs. In 10 years, or by 2029, STEM jobs are going to double in growth compared to all other industries, and that's health, education, all of these other industries, because STEM is our key to being able to keep up with an advanced global society, compete economically, compete in the digital world. In a time where there's a data revolution, we need people who are able to deal with large, massive amounts of data and effectively in order to advance us as a society.
So how do we break down that barrier and get more African American youth into these fields, into these STEM fields? Where does that start?
One of the barriers is definitely breaking down structural barriers. We need to broaden math pathways. So most people are familiar with the algebra to calculus pipeline. So typically in the 7th grade, 8th grade, depending on whether or not your teacher places you on the accelerated path, that determines whether or not you're able to make it into calculus by your senior year of high school. Did you do accelerated math, and what was your math trajectory?
Math was not my strong suit.
It's so interesting because when I compare, and so I'm finishing up my PhD in quantitative methods. When I compare the subject of math to other subjects like English, language arts, or history, math is the most black and white. People look at math and define it by being tethered to logic and reason. Math is sequential in nature, so it's essentially like following a recipe, per se. It's a formula. First you put in the eggs, and then after the eggs you put in the water, and then you put in the oil. And if you can follow that formula, you can bake a cake, essentially. However, somewhere along the line, we have not adequately provided, enough education and foundation in order for students to be able to follow these formulas and do well in math. Your story is something that I've heard specifically, disproportionately among Black students. I'm not good in math. I've never been good in math. But the students who have those stronger foundations with strong teachers that not just teach students, in very important facility in the use of math in order for them to be successful, but the teachers who say, I think you're good at this. You did a really good job at that. Math is that one subject that it's kind of black and white, as opposed to I write a lot. So in terms of writing, when I write, I have to write something that's going to be entertaining. It needs to be engaging. It has to be at a certain level where, general audiences can understand it. And at the same time, it has to have a level of expertise to it. My grammar needs to be okay. So I would look at something like writing, it's subjective. Mm-hmm. I could think I produced a fantastic piece. You look at it and you say, I don't like it at all. So writing is not like mathematics in the sense that math, the answer is either wrong or right.
Yes. And
it would also be something for a population who has been most discriminated against, something that they would be most attracted to. How do you look at a page? How does 2 + 2 never equal 4? Whereas, if you're writing and you have and you talk in an African American standard dialect and you write the way that you talk, someone who is used to a traditional European or English standard dialect, they'll say that this is grammatically incorrect, or this doesn't make sense, or this isn't something that I'm culturally, able to understand. Whereas math is black and white, so you think it would be something that more black students who have experienced discrimination would be attracted to. But because of our society and things that have been ingrained into us, black students are often, not necessarily recommended for these accelerated paths that then take them to calculus, that then take them to STEM careers. But to answer your question in terms of what can we do, we can broaden math pathways, and there's a new math that's called data science. And across the country, California being one of the states, California, Virginia, many states are starting to implement data science because it's a modern math. It is not a math that we learned back in the 50s in order to build rocket ships. It takes big data and it helps people to really understand it in a way to improve the human experience. And if black students can have access to that math, especially in high school, it could potentially expose them to careers that they would not normally be interested in, like programming, data scientists, becoming data scientists, so many different careers that will lead them into lucrative opportunities.
Talk to me about the importance of having a black teacher.
Oh my God, having a black teacher is probably one of the most impactful things that can happen to any student. Just the research in and of itself says that if a student has a teacher that matches their race, they're in STEM 4 times more likely to complete a major in STEM and go on and do well. There's a huge gap in STEM careers and STEM majors among black people, but we've been able to demonstrate one black teacher can essentially turn that trajectory around. What black teachers offer is this indirect mentor or model per se that most white people have, and they don't even realize it. A white male sitting in the classroom, the majority of the scientists and the people he sees on TV or in these tech, savvy careers, they're white. So he has this mentor that he sees that is, indirectly influencing who he is and who he's going to become. A black person, not so much. We have all of these black students or these black kids, if you ask the average black kid, male that is, what is he going to do? He's going to, maybe play basketball or maybe play football or maybe become an entertainer. That's because those are who their models are.
That's all they see.
That's all they see. So if they don't have non-official mentors in these spaces that they're seeing that they can identify with, it's very difficult for you to be able to see yourself in that path. In addition to that, Black teachers, they have an advantage. They talk similarly. Children at a very young age, they end up having to learn how to code switch and know not to use the same language that they use in their home. To this day, there's nothing more comfortable to me than being in my own environment and using double negatives.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And just being able to do that without anyone assuming that I have a lower education, and just feel comfortable with that. But being able to get into an environment using, like I said, like a double negative, and the teacher still believes that you're competent because he or she uses double negatives.
Melodie Baker is the National Policy Director of Just Equations. She was speaking with Thomas O'Neill White. Dave Debo is here now with Antoine Johnson from the Fatherhood program at the Buffalo Prenatal and Perinatal Network.
I was thinking about the experience that my wife and I had when we had our second child, our son. And so when my wife, she went into preterm labor, and it was scary for her and me at the time. And when we were in, I don't know what the room is called, but as they were prepping her, she kind of felt rushed, and like some of the nurses or doctors are talking over her head. But there was one African-American nurse in there that was really kind of paying attention to her. Like, did you understand what they just asked you and those kind of things? And she really appreciated that her and I talked a little bit about it. But I was grateful that she did ask my wife questions to clarify things and help her to understand, because it was an overwhelming situation. Probably a lot more for her than me. But yeah, I mean, so you think about like doulas and some of the things you talked about around maternal deaths and so forth. I mean, that I think just the advocacy part, having nurses that care and can explain things to the patients is super important.
What of the difficulties that fathers specifically face, though? Is that something beyond some of the health stuff that Luann has already talked about?
Somewhat. I mean, some of it is very similar. So one of the things that I learned over the last year or so is that 1 out of every 10 men will experience
postpartum
depression.
Seriously, I'd never heard that.
Which is not something that...
you think of it as a woman thing.
You think of it as a woman thing, not something that a lot of men will probably even admit if they do have it. And so that was really something for me to learn. But I think a lot of the things that, we talk about men in this space of infant and maternal health, they're kind of like the invisible parent or person when we have these discussions. One of the things that I also learned was that 1 out of every 4 children will grow up in a home without their biological father in the United States, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And when that happens, mothers are twice as more likely to experience infant mortality, right? Their rates go up, the dropout rates go up. Women are 7 times, or teenage women are 7 times more likely to have teenage pregnancies, and the list goes on. And so I think just about everything that we're talking about intersects with men and fatherhood.
Is your goal then to help existing fathers stay with the family?
Absolutely, that's a part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So
just a part, though. Tell me more.
Yeah. So our very first cohort, I'll never forget, we had the youngest person in the group was about 18. They weren't even a father yet. They were just playing like a father figure role to nephews. And the oldest was in like mid-60s. And so he was kind of starting all over again.
Wow.
And so we just looked at this intergenerational group and the different dynamics in terms of life stages and priorities and all sorts of things. And it was really interesting. And I mean, the needs vary too. So, I mean, this topic around fatherhood and, kind of understanding what's important is really vague.
What do you do? Take me through that kind of talk. Do you just pull fathers in individually? Just like Luann has people working individually on some of the health issues, do you pull people in individually and talk to them about whatever's going on in their life?
Sometimes we do provide individual services, and we try to meet dads where they are on an individual level, but a lot of the work that we do is group-based.
Okay.
And so we do these cohort models seasonally, so fall, winter, and spring, and we take dads through a course known as Nurturing Fathers. And so it's traditionally a 13-week group where we talk about everything from what our relationships were like with our fathers, which is huge, because a lot of us didn't have fathers in our lives, which is why we see some of the rates we see when men are not involved in the lives of their children, because for a lot of men or fathers, it's hard to be what you never saw, right? And so we talk to them about that.
You can't model behavior that you don't know.
Exactly. And so one of the things with the Nurturing Fathers curriculum, which is evidence-based, is that it teaches men how to unlearn some of those negative behaviors, right? So if they grew up in abusive homes or whatever, right? It walks them through how to kind of unlearn some of that stuff, even though a lot of it is very traumatic. But then also how to learn new parenting practices that will aid them in their experiences as fathers. And so we talk about things related to co-parenting. What's the difference of fathering a boy versus a girl, and everything in between.
I'm trying to thread the needle here between stereotyping and putting the problem through a racial equity lens. Mm-hmm. What's the makeup of your group?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So because more often than not, when people think about fatherhood programs, they think about programming for black men who are not involved in the lives of their children, and that is not true. So one of the other things that I found interesting when I first started at Buffalo Prenatal was that the CDC did a study between 2006 and 2010. One of the things that they found out was that black men are actually more involved than some of the other races of ethnicities when it comes to direct care. So we're talking about things like bathing and feeding, taking their kids to school, and doing, just the day-to-day kind of things.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that because of the narrative that is put out there.
Yeah.
Right. So the makeup of our groups, to answer your question, it varies. So it's almost half and half in terms of African American and white fathers, and we have Asian and Hispanic and different fathers from time to time. But I would say both white and black fathers in the community are predominant.
I want to go back to that stat you had earlier, though. The 1 in 4. Mm-hmm. Is that specific to African American men?
No.
That's in general.
Men in general, yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the thing you have to target and deal with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right.
Antoine Johnson speaking with WBFO's Dave Debo. This is Buffalo What's Next, Producer Picks, weekly highlights from our recent interviews on WBFO. Our featured interview today is with Fatima Morell, recently picked as one of Time Magazine's National Innovators in Education. She's the Buffalo Public Schools Associate Superintendent of Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Initiatives.
When we talk about unpacking white supremacy, we know that that's a scary topic for a lot of people. Like, what does that mean? But until this racist massacre that happened on May 14th, many people didn't even understand that there are networks of white supremacist groups that are engaging with our young people online. They are enticing them. They are giving them false bravado and attempting them to do things that are horrendous in the name of whiteness and in the name of replacement theory, for example, that, blacks and Jews and Latinx peoples will replace us if we don't, exterminate them. I mean, it's horrible. And these networks and these groups, they're large and wide, but a lot of us don't want to talk about those groups because they are very also intimidating and they're scary, right? But they are getting our kids on the networks. books, on the internet, through different kinds of technological means. And if they find students who may be vulnerable, who may be feeling left out or left alone or not appreciated by family, young people, they will bring them in and actually, make them, groom them to be these here lone wolves that'll go and do something horrendous. But on a more subtle scale, when we talk about racism, extreme racism that leads to white supremacist notions of superiority, it's those subliminal kinds of things that we see and that our kids are, picking up on. For example, when we never have a black or brown valedictorian, for example, in our schools, or we never talk about the history and culture, the hard truths of history and culture of people of color. It's kind of marginalized in our textbooks or even in our pedagogy. And so those kinds of inklings of racism, or the subliminal messages that are sent that, certain groups of people or certain cultures are not valued, are not important, lead to larger and more systemic types of racism and racialized thinking that leads our kids to go out there and explore for themselves what they think they should know about people who don't look like them. And that's when we get into dangerous territories of white supremacy and of course, everything that goes along with that.
Let's move into just a little bit then about the curriculum that you have and your team have worked on developing in the Buffalo Public Schools. And I love one of the quotes that I saw here from you. And it talks about students weren't getting information about who they are, their greatness.
Yes. With the emancipation curriculum, it really is a liberating curriculum. And so you may ask me, well, liberating from what? Really unlocking the cognitive abilities of our kids, unlocking true history for them so that they can think freely and think for themselves and make decisions about life in the world for themselves. But first, they have to be given accurate information. We can't partially educate our children and then ask them to make informed decisions about who they are or to advocate for their own justice and their own liberation if they don't even know that there's a struggle going on. And where does that struggle begin? So when we talk about the emancipation curriculum, we want to start from the origins of America. And as hard as that truth is, we have to unpack that so that they can see that through all of the trials, the triumphs, the Jim Crow segregation, the lynchings, the mobs, the riots, the massacres, we still stand as a strong people, and we still stand as a people who have contributed infinitely to American history, society, and to the world. Our first mathematical geniuses, Imhotep, right? Our first, where does math originate? Why don't kids know that? If they know, hey, genetically I'm prone to doing math because actually the people of Kemet, my people, created math and created science. So I should be able to do very well at that. But when kids don't understand their own greatness or their lineage of historical and intellectual brilliance, they can't connect to that. And then they're not, and that makes them, not know who they are, and then they can't academically achieve the way that they would achieve if they are exposed to who they truly are as a people. And that's all children. And we do this wonderfully for white children. They're included in all the books, the stories, the histories are there. They feel good about themselves. They can see themselves mirrored in that curriculum. And that's wonderful. But what we have to do is we have to do that same thing for our children of color, historically marginalized communities of color. And we know right now that the research shows us that we, in Americans' books and textbooks, we show animals are represented twice as much as black people in textbooks, in American and children's books and in text. And so even our indigenous people are only represented by 1%. Our Latinx people are only represented by about 5 or 6%. But then you have animals represented at 27%, Black people represented at 10%. So it's our job to make sure that our students can see themselves in that curriculum, have literature where they are the protagonists of the story, and they're doing great things, and they're loving themselves, like love who you are, because there are so many signals and misinformation that sends a message that you're not great, that you're not as good as, that you are less than. So it's really important for us as educators to show, no, we're all part of the human fabric. We all have something great to contribute and to offer, and that's part of my role, and that's part of the emancipation curriculum, to ensure that kids can see themselves wonderfully as they are, all children, in the curriculum.
And what are kids in the district reading, or what are they learning that they weren't 5 to 10 years ago?
Well, one of the big things that we did implement that was, I think, really changing, a big game changer for us was the 1619 project. Because not only did kids not know the origins of the legacy of enslavement, but a lot of us adults also did not know. So we had to, so in order to best train our children, we must first understand who they are, not just present day, but also historically. And also where they're going in the future, because if we have low expectations, they will achieve low if you set that bar low. So with our young people, what we wanted to do is show them, right? Because we talk about the Mayflower, but no one ever talks about the white lion. Who was on the white lion? Some 20 odd, right? When you read that in the 1619 project, some 20 odd Black people who settled at Point Comfort, Virginia, right? In 1619. And then someone decided chattel slavery will begin. But those 20-some odd Africans who came here and their descendants, it was never a complacent place for them to be enslaved. There was a struggle from the beginning. There were uprisings, right? So we need to let our kids know we were never happy enslaved people. We were just outgunned, outmanned, and of course we just did not know how to hate people. That's my personal opinion. Like, I think it's hard. It was.
And if I may, hasn't that been on display in the East Side community since May 14th? Just what you said there,
yes.
About hate. I'm not seeing that at all.
No one in our community, in the Black community, even after this white massacrous attack on our community, even after, you've never heard, I haven't heard a single person of color or even a white person say, I'm angry at white people. I blame the entire white race for this. It's never happened because it's not true and it's not who we are. And this was a young man who was terribly misguided by white supremacist groups who wrote a 180-page manifesto based upon the guidance he received from the wrong place. So when I talk about we have to educate all our children, especially our white children, that's what I'm talking about, so that they don't go out there on the websites and try and educate themselves about Black people from, the Proud Boys or, this other group that I can't remember right now that's a New York State-based group, right? So we have to take hold of all of our children so that they are not educated that way. But so we empowered our children through the 1619 project and other curriculum efforts to know who they are, know there was always a struggle, and never complacent, never happy, docile working slaves as we're portrayed in so many books. But we're always fighting and always contributing, right? So everything that almost every institution that you see in America has been touched by the hands of African Americans. When I took about 90 kids to the Capitol building 2 years before the January 6th, racist attack on our country, the children saw the bust of Rosa Parks, and they saw Frederick Douglass and things like that. And then I told them, I said, you've been to the White House, you've been to the Capitol building. Look at these places. And they said, yeah, they're beautiful. They're absolutely wonderful. And I said, you know whose hands toiled to build these edifices? And they said, who? I said, Black people, your ancestors. And they were, oh my God, for real? You know, and then I took them to a little site where they showed the bricks, a little side part they have over in the Capitol building where they have the bricks and they show, you know, the enslaved, they give the contribution to the slave African. I say, hey, we have a footnote here. Look at it. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's the kind of learning and achievement that we have to empower our kids with, to emancipate their minds and liberate them to understand their own abilities to be great, to be academically excellent, and to advocate for justice for themselves and their community.
Now, using the 1619 project and, you know, just putting in this curriculum, has that been a heavy lift for you? Has it been a heavy lift for the teachers putting this all together?
Well, I have a great team. Okay, and so none of us do it alone, and I'm keenly aware of that. So my time recognition also belongs to the Office of CLRI, the directors and the supervisors, the parents who hold me, who have my back, who watch out for me, and who look out and make sure that this work continues in our district. That recognition belongs to them. But yeah, it has been a heavy lift. It's not easy. First of all, timing and stars aligning. Really, I believe in that, because when we began writing the emancipation curriculum, we had white teachers who were really incensed by the George Floyd issue. And they came forward and said, we got to do something, Dr. Morell. And on the steps of City Hall that summer, we had 700 or so teachers came out and protested and said, Black Lives Matter. And they got on their knees and they took a knee. I have pictures. And it was the most amazing experience of human connection that I had ever had up until that point, right? I mean, it was like they cared so much. And remember, our teachers are 80% white. So when they came back to the table, they wanted to write a curriculum that told the truth. That's all it really, really, truly is when you think of the emancipation curriculum. It's just that part of the story that's untold. And it was the teachers, along with the Office of CLRI, on those curriculum committee, about 40 teachers that began the work, began the research, going out, looking at what other districts were doing, pulling resources that were credible, getting in contact with the Library of Congress. So we had credible resources, using the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center, using the work of the New Jersey Amistad curriculum that had been vetted highly by the New Jersey Department of Education, looking at the work of the Zen Education Project, looking at the Black Lives Matter guiding principles and the work out of Seattle schools. And we brought all that to the table and we said, let's put this together for our kids. Let's save lives. Let's put this together. And that's what we do. Because this emancipation curriculum, it also dismantles the school to prison pipeline. Because when you think about I'm actually, there's more to me than Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, right? I actually, civilization, the cradle of civilization is in Africa. And so, a lot of this began with me, and I'm supposed to be great because those people were great. And they fought and died for me to do things like vote and go to school with white children and go to school with all children and things of that nature. And so this is really I look at it more as a calling to saving lives than just a curriculum. Because now I can see myself, I can connect to something positive in the work that I'm reading. I'm opening up a book, I'm 5 or 6 years old, and I'm reading about my hair is beautiful, as a 5 or 6 year old, instead of being, told something opposite that we see quite frequently in the media and on the news outlets. So it's a life change. It's a life-saving mechanism, the emancipation curriculum. And we're going to continue to push equity for all with that curriculum.
I'm going to take a time out. We've got a lot to talk about this morning on Buffalo What's Next. Dr. Fatima Morell from Buffalo Public Schools with us. We'll take a break, come back with more here on WBFO.
Support for WBFO, your NPR station, comes from our members and from Buffalo Commons Charter School, now enrolling K and first grade students for the 2022-23 school year. Buffalo Commons Charter School is a place where kids can engage with a rigorous project-based curriculum, develop strong relationships with diverse classmates, and discover a sense of purpose. Details and information at buffalocommonscharter.org or 716-222-0416.
Watch the WNED PBS original production Daredevils of Niagara Falls.
I think part of the lure of Niagara was that it was understood to be a very dangerous place.
A daredevil is somebody who goes out and does a daring thing. Maybe they make it and maybe they don't.
Daredevils of Niagara Falls, now streaming on YouTube and the PBS video app.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And we're back on Buffalo What's Next. With us, the Associate Superintendent of Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Initiatives for Buffalo Public Schools, Dr. Fatima Morell, Jay Moran, along with Thomas O'Neill White. And, we've touched upon some of the principles, I guess, about the emancipation curriculum. But I heard you mention also in a previous interview about a book. And I like to mention books on this program because I always have this picture of WBFO and NPR listeners hearing about books and then marching over to the library. And a book called The Spider Weaver. Talk a little bit about what that book might teach a young student.
And so, well, I love this book. Can't remember the author right now, but it really it talks about the greatness of the Ghanaian culture, right? And so when we think about Ghana and we think about West Africa, we know that many of our ancestors may have come from Ghana. And we know that they did. And this particular piece really talks about the kente cloth fabric. So when you see the vibrant and rich colors that the kente cloth, the African ancestors wore and still wear, our present Ghanaian brothers and sisters, and even right here in America, we still wear Ghanaian fabrics all the time. Sometimes we don't know that those are royalty fabrics. And so in the Ghanaian culture, if you wore a certain fabric, particularly kente, and that particular arrangement of the fabric, the materials, let's see, the colors and all of that represent certain royal families and lineage in the Ghanaian culture. So not everyone initially could just wear whatever any kente. They can wear kente cloth, but they couldn't wear that vibrant orange and yellow and green. It wasn't for everyone. It was for the royals and for traditional, celebrations and things of that nature. Celebrations around births and marriages and even funerals. And so it was really connecting our young people with the African culture, but also connecting their minds to, you come from greatness, you come from royalty, and connecting all children to the concept that all of us are together through a woven fabric of what we call life, and all of us are great. And white children can see, oh, I know a lot about my culture, but black kids, they actually have descendants that came from Africa, and look at this beautiful culture. So the Spider Weaver story is just a great story about African ancestry and uplift, and it's an amazing story.
Hey, we had on last week Vicki Math, who was one of the presenters at the Teaching Black History conference that UB held, and she talked about also that culture out of Ghana as well. Maybe expand on it just a little bit more as well, because she got into that a little bit, and here I am. I was a kid educated in the 60s and 70s. Things I most certainly didn't know about, and I would think that I speak for a large amount of people who find that same thing. Again, you're talking about the greatness that has been lost to history. Expand on it a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things that the Ghanaian and the Twi language people of Ghana, of West Africa, also gifted us with are proverbs and through the Adinkra symbols and teachings. And so we get to learn a lot about the thinking of our ancestors, historical thinking all the way in Africa through what we call affirmations through the Adinkra symbols of West Africa. And so you will see, for example, when you see the Swahili word umoja, unity, right? And you will also, so there's hundreds of these symbols that basically teach citizenship, democracy, love, affection, family, community. You will see in these...
And a culture that goes historically back before what we saw in 1776 in America, correct?
Oh, eons back. Yes. Right. Oh, absolutely. And that's why I said it's such a gift to the present, because we know that as early as the 13 and 1400s, the Ghanaian culture, created Adinkra fabric with symbols to teach us about, as I stated, family and community and love. Like akoma means love, and it has a whole definition around it. Amari, strength, and why, and what does it mean to be strong? These words and these symbols also teach, they go back quite extensively before 1776 and before any invasion or conquering of African the Ghanaian shores of West Africa. So there's a lot to learn, and we do have that as a gift. And I actually we in our My Brother's Keeper program, the Mel Academy program, we actually teach those symbols and those affirmations at every session that we come into, so that they can know their connection, their lineage to their West African history and culture, but also how to be a great young man.
And those symbols can be found around the city. I believe they are on the Kensington, and they are on the new tops on Jefferson Avenue. Thanks to Kat Massey, who unfortunately lost her life in that Jefferson shooting. Dr. Morell, why do you think these topics being learned through the emancipation curriculum were previously overlooked?
I think I heard someone say recently, I never liked Pearson to begin with. Okay, so books are a business, like most anything else. And so what are we doing? We are appealing to those who have the power, the cultural capital, and economic power to purchase our books. And so I'm going to tell a story that fits into a narrative that allows us all comfort in our racism.
Buffalo Public Schools Associate Superintendent Fatima Morell. You heard her talk about books and other resources. We close now with author Desiree Williams and her son Cortland. She's the author of the children's book Beautiful Brown Babies.
So I've been an educator for over 10 years now, and specifically a school psychologist for almost 10 years. And so I've always had a passion for education, specifically the education of Black and brown children, and really helping them reach their highest educational potential. And when I had my son in 2016, from the time that he was born, I was really intentional about finding resources, specifically books for him that would give him a sense of self-pride and self-worth and self-love and his Blackness. I really couldn't find anything like that was developmentally appropriate and fun and colorful and engaging. And so I wrote the book that I was looking for. It was really just going to be a gift for him. Mm-hmm. And I started sharing it with friends and family, and they were so excited about it and really liked it. And it was actually my mother, who is Dr. Antoine Williams. She was the one who really encouraged me to self-publish it and to make it widely distributed.
We talk a lot about representation, representation in careers, in movies, in TV, in books even, but not necessarily a lot has been paid to representation for children's books, young readers, those who are just starting to read, in order to see themselves. Why does that matter? Why is that important?
Positive representation in media in general is so important, and I will scream that to the rooftops and for the rest of my life, because I feel like it gives children an opportunity to see themselves in ways that they never thought possible, which could really be life-changing. And books specifically are so special because out of all the medias, I think they're the most accessible. So not everyone has, access to television or the internet or movies, but I would dare to say everybody has access to books through libraries and schools and, roaming a bookstore and those kinds of things. And so books are really special in that way, and they can really be a mirror for children to see themselves in ways they never thought possible, and also a window for children to look in on people that look different from them and see what their lives and communities are like, which is, I think, really powerful and life-changing as well.
So it's not necessarily always for little black or brown children. It really is universal for everyone to peek in and see how other people live or how other people exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really builds empathy in children and builds, that curiosity is what really makes a well-developed society in the future.
Trauma over current events affects everyone, certainly in different ways, but for children specifically, it's difficult, and it presents itself in manifests in odd ways because children often lack the words for the emotions that they might feel. How do you talk to kids about racism, about hate?
It really depends on their developmental stage, and I would say for young children, research has shown that they really see race as through color. So up until age 7, children see themselves as brown or white, and that blackness is really that social construct that's a little bit abstract for them to understand. But if you can talk to your child about affirming their color as a brown person with, curly hair or straight hair or, whatever way that you look, and to really say that's what's special about you and that's amazing. And, children who look different than you are also amazing because they have these things that make them different and unique, and really exposing your children to different ways of living and being and looking, but also, as I was saying, affirming what they look like and who they are as well.
Your book does some of that, as well as teach and touch a little bit on history. You have some figures in your book who are wearing certain things, so children are being exposed to this. Is that, I'm assuming it's by design, so that parents can start to have conversations?
Yes, absolutely. It was important for me to input those little bits of historical figures without overtly explaining them in that context, because the book is really a book of affirmations to make children feel proud. But you're right to start those conversations of what does it mean? What does red, black, and green mean? Or why does that child have an X on his head? What does that X mean? And, that helps parents kind of start those conversations.
This is Buffalo What's Next. We're speaking with local author Desiree Williams about talking to kids about the positivity of their culture and inclusivity and other more sensitive, more difficult topics. How has your book been received by parents?
So there's been a really, really great positive response. And my mother and friends and family were right in that a lot of people were looking for books like this. That I think, since 2017, there's been kind of a boom of diversity in media, in children's media specifically. Mm-hmm. But at the time that it came out, there were a lot of parents who were looking for those types of resources. So since Brilliant Brown Babies, I've self-published 2 additional books and a workbook that is affirming Black and brown children as well. And I have a social media platform that's grown to almost 3,000 followers of just like a community of parents and educators who are looking for those social emotional resources that look at that development through the lens of diversity and inclusion.
So there's been a lot of discussion in school board meetings, in online platforms, on Twitter, about critical race theory, mm-hmm. about teaching African and unfiltered African American history to students in school. It's caused quite an uproar. It seems to be a very divisive issue mm-hmm. for a lot of people. There is concern that teaching critical race theory, teaching about Black and brown children, mm-hmm. and teaching them their history, their unfiltered history, would cause white children to feel badly about themselves. What would you say to the parents who are against teaching this because they feel that you're going to make their kids feel badly about themselves?
So, Black history is American history. It's everyone's history. And I think it's important to teach it in a way that is unfiltered in order to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself. What I would say for parents who are concerned about their children feeling shameful of things that their ancestors may have done is to discuss those feelings of shame, because if you're feeling shameful, then you don't identify with, some of those bad things that your ancestors have done. And that helps you propel change for the future. But I think it's so important that we discuss those things and we have those conversations. And for parents who maybe are not able or don't know how to have those conversations. We live in a digital age with so many resources that can allow parents to help facilitate those conversations with their children. But to erase critical race theory or Black history is just not the answer. And I think I would say to those parents, think about the Black child in that class or Black children in classes for decades that have had to only see their history through the eyes of oppression, through slavery and civil rights, which are, very important topics to talk about.
Right.
But I think it's also important for Black children and white children to know about all of the amazing contributions that Black people have made to society globally. Mm-hmm. The civilizations that were in Africa before slavery, or to even know about things like, that a Black person created the traffic light or the elevator, the right. potato chip. I think those things are important for all children to know, and it really fosters a sense of community and takes away that otherness that perpetuates racism.
Talk to me about the African American experience in school and what that looks like for a black, a brown child, and then what that really looks like for a non-black or brown child.
Mm-hmm. I think that would depend on the child, the school, the district, the dynamics. Yeah. But in general, our black children in schools, I think historically have a distrust towards the school system because they aren't seeing themselves in the curriculum. I mean, until recently, we've seen some progression, but until recently, we really haven't seen ourselves in the curriculum. You sit through history class and you learn about all the wars and, the presidents and, all of these different things. And then when we talk about African Americans, we talk about slavery.
The first time, we had a professor on a few weeks ago who said the first time when he was a child and he heard about black people was an encounter in a textbook that black people were slaves.
Yes.
There was apparently nothing prior to that in his world or even in the textbook.
Exactly. Yeah, that is 100% true. And I think even in world history, we don't talk a lot about what went on in Africa before colonization and slavery, and the positive contributions that black people have had to society. So I think because of that, if you're not seeing yourself in the curriculum, you're not connecting to it, and you don't trust it, and it's really detrimental to a lot of our African American children in the education system.
Where am I?
So I want to, at this point, introduce a special guest that we have here today. Like most working parents, childcare can sometimes be a challenge. Sometimes creative solutions are necessary.
Yes.
And one of the creative solutions that we came up with today was to have Desiree bring her son with her. Who has joined you here?
This is my son, Cortland, and he is my co-creator and CEO of Brilliant Brown Babies.
Hi, Cortland.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good.
Yeah? Can you tell me how old you are?
5.
So you're going to be starting school?
Yeah.
What grade are you going into?
First grade.
First grade. Have you read your mom's book? Can you tell me what you thought about it?
Good.
Yeah? So when you go into first grade, on the first day of school and your new classmate says, "Hey, do you know a good book?" What will you say?
Brilliant Brown Babies. I think we don't. I think my kids don't say Brilliant Brown Babies. I've been in kindergarten.
Oh, okay.
So they don't know. They don't want to talk about it.
What would you say to your classmates? Tell them why it's important to read.
They already know.
Oh, they already know. Okay. Indeed. But why should they read Brilliant Brown Babies?
They don't have any Brilliant Brown Baby books.
You were telling me earlier that you have a favorite thing that you study, that you look at, that you play with. What is that?
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs are fantastic. What makes dinosaurs so special for you?
'Cause they fight and they fight.
Yeah. They fight. They eat things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was saying that my favorite was the T-Rex, but you don't think that should be my favorite one, right?
T-Rex is kind of big, but Spinosaurus can beat T-Rex easily.
Oh, it's because T-Rex has small arms, isn't it? Exactly. I was wondering if you would be able to help me finish out my job here on the show today. Do you think you can maybe do that?
Yeah.
So this is big time announcer stuff that you're going to have to do. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
What about those headphones?
You can put on the headphones if you'd like.
Can you hear?
Okay, there you go. You ready? Okay,
Yeah.
so repeat after me. Thank you
Thank you
for listening
to listening
to Buffalo.
to Buffalo.
What's next?
What's next?
That's Cortland and Desiree Williams. Buffalo What's Next is a weekday podcast, a radio program on WBFO and on demand at WBFO.org. We talk about race, about education, and about our shared humanity. Listen for us each weekday morning at 10 and each weekday evening at 9 on WBFO. I'm Brigid Jaipaul-Valenza. Thank you for listening.